I am Claire, 38 years old, and as a risk assessment director for a top-tier venture capital firm, my job is to predict disasters before they happen. I manage billion-dollar portfolios and spotlights across boardroom tables without blinking. Yet somehow I miss the biggest liability living right under my own roof. Every night my husband went into our 15-year-old daughter's room. One day, I set up a camera and saw things I never could have imagined. Every night at exactly 2 a.m., Derek would slide out of our bed. No sound, no lights, just a shadow moving in the dark. I lay there with my eyes closed, listening to the floorboards creak, my heart hammering against my ribs, thinking the absolute worst. Was he hurting her? Was he abusing her? The truth turned out to be far more twisted than physical abuse. Before I tell you what I saw on that screen, hit that subscribe button if you believe a mother's intuition is never wrong. The morning after I first suspected something was wrong, the air in our kitchen felt heavy enough to choke on. The sunlight hit the marble island that I had paid for with my bonus last year, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but it brought no warmth. I was standing at the stove flipping pancakes, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. Sophie walked in, dragging her feet. My 15-year-old daughter used to be vibrant, full of sarcasm, and life the kind of girl who would steal my mascara and laugh about it. Now, she looked like a ghost haunting her own home. Her eyes were rimmed with red dark circles carved deep into her pale skin. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice soft as I slid a plate of blueberry pancakes toward her. It was her favorite, or it used to be. Sophie looked at the plate, and then she looked at me. Her expression was not just tired, it was terrified. She flinched when I reached out to tuck a stray hair behind her ear. "Don't touch me," she whispered. The venom in her voice was so sudden, so unprovoked, that I froze. Before I could ask what was wrong, she swept her arm across the counter. The plate flew. Porcelain shattered against the floor, blueberries and syrup splattering across the pristine white tiles and onto my business suit. I stood there, stunned, syrup dripping down my leg. That was when Derek walked in. My husband. The man I had supported for 12 years while he chased one failed dream after another. He was currently calling himself a life coach on Instagram, posting videos about mindfulness while I paid the mortgage, the tuition, and the credit card bills he thought I didn't see. Derek didn't look at the mess. He didn't ask if I was okay. He went straight to Sophie, wrapping his arms around her in a protective embrace that felt performative. "Look what you did, Claire," he said, his voice dropping to that calm, condescending tone he used when he wanted to make me feel small. "You are scaring her. Your energy is too intense. I told you that the stress from your firm is poisoning this house." Sophie buried her face in his chest, sobbing. I watched them, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I was the one covered in food. I was the one who had been screamed at. Yet somehow in the narrative Derek was spinning, I was the villain. I didn't scream back. I didn't defend myself. In my line of work, you don't react to volatility with emotion. You react with data. I looked at Derek, really looked at him. He was stroking Sophie's hair, whispering that Daddy was here, but his other hand was reaching for his coffee mug. It was trembling. A subtle, rhythmic tremor. Derek was not a man who got nervous. He was a narcissist who thrived on chaos. If his hands were shaking, he was hiding something massive. I silently picked up a napkin, wiped the syrup from my shoe, and walked out of the kitchen. That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with teenage rebellion. I was dealing with a coordinated attack. The situation escalated 2 days later during our weekend barbecue. It was supposed to be a relaxing afternoon, but relaxing was impossible when Derek's family was involved. I was manning the grill, flipping steaks for 20 people, because Derek claimed the smoke irritated his allergies. In reality, he just didn't want to get grease on his new linen shirt, which of course I had paid for. His mother Beatrice sat under the pergola like a queen on a throne, criticizing everything from the marinade to the landscaping. But it was his sister-in-law, Nia, who put me on high alert. Nia was a family law attorney, aggressive, sharp, and deeply envious of my career. She sat with a glass of my most expensive wine, watching Sophie swim in the pool with a predatory gaze. "Sophie looks thin," Nia said, not looking at me but making sure her voice carried loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Children often lose weight when they feel unsafe in their home environment. I flipped a steak, keeping my back to her. She is 15, Nia. She is growing. Nia swirled her wine. In my practice, I see this all the time. High-powered mothers who choose the boardroom over the nursery. The courts in this state are very strict about emotional neglect, Claire. It is actually easier to lose custody now than it ever has been, especially if the child expresses a preference for the more present parent. I turned around slowly. The tongs in my hand were cold, hard steel. Are you giving me legal advice, Nia, or are you threatening me? She smiled a tight, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. I am just looking out for the family, Claire. We all know Derek is the primary caregiver emotionally. He is the one who understands Sophie's delicate soul. You are just the bank account, Beatrice chimed in from the corner. It is true. Derek has always been such a nurturer. Maybe it would be best if you took a sabbatical, Claire, went to a facility to manage your anger. Sophie told us about the plate you threw at her. I felt the blood drain from my face. The plate she threw. They had twisted the narrative so completely that in their version of reality, I was the abuser. I looked at Derek across the yard. He was laughing with a neighbor, playing the role of the charming, relaxed host. But he was watching me, waiting for me to explode, waiting for me to scream at his mother and sister so he could turn to our guests and say, "See, I told you she was unstable." I didn't give them the satisfaction. I placed the platter of meat on the table with deliberate precision. "I am going to check on dessert," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Inside the house, I leaned against the cool granite of the counter and breathed. They were setting a stage. They were building a case. And the centerpiece of their strategy was my daughter's inheritance. My father had left a trust fund for Sophie $50 million that would unlock when she turned 18. But there was a clause. If I, the sole trustee, was deemed mentally unfit or lost legal custody, the control of that money would shift to her legal guardian. Derek didn't just want my daughter. He wanted the $50 million he had been salivating over since the day we met. That night the house was silent, but the silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I lay in bed next to Derek. He was breathing deeply, feigning sleep, but I knew the difference. His breathing was too controlled. I had spent the last 3 hours installing the software on my phone, linking it to the high-definition camera I had sewn inside the eye of the vintage teddy bear on Sophie's bookshelf earlier that evening. It was a risk. If Sophie found it, she would hate me forever. If Derek found it, he would destroy it. But I had no choice. The digital clock on the nightstand clicked to 1:59 a.m. Right on schedule, the mattress shifted. Derek moved with the practice of a predator. He slid out from under the duvet, his feet making no sound on the plush carpet. He didn't look at me. He crept out of the bedroom, leaving the door open just a crack. I waited 10 seconds, counting my heartbeats, before I reached under my pillow and pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. I opened the app. The screen flickered to life. The night vision mode turned the room a ghostly green. There he was, my husband, the man I had vowed to love and cherish. He wasn't doing anything graphic. He wasn't touching her inappropriately. What he was doing was infinitely more terrifying. He was sitting on a chair right next to her pillow, leaning in so close his lips were inches from her ear. Sophie was asleep, or in that twilight state between sleep and waking where the mind is most suggestive. I turned the volume up on my phone, pressing the speaker to my ear. His voice came through a low, rhythmic whisper, like an incantation. "Mom hates you, Sophie. Mom wishes you were never born. She told me she wants to send you away. She wants to lock you in a hospital. Listen to me, Sophie. Only Daddy loves you. Only Auntie Nia can protect you. The world is dangerous. Mom is dangerous. You have to help us get rid of her. You have to sign the papers Nia gives you. If you don't, Mom will hurt you again." I watched on the small screen as my daughter whimpered in her sleep, tossing her head as if having a nightmare. Derek reached out and stroked her forehead, anchoring the lie with physical touch. "Good girl," he whispered. "Remember this when you wake up. Mom is the enemy. We have to destroy her to survive." I slapped a hand over my mouth to stop the scream that was clawing its way up my throat. This was psychological warfare. He was using sleep hypnosis, a technique he had probably learned from his fraudulent life coaching courses, to rewrite my daughter's memories. He was planting seeds of terror in her subconscious, turning her against me from the inside out. I wasn't losing my daughter to teenage angst. I was losing her to a cult of one. And the leader of that cult was sleeping in my bed. I hit the record button. My finger hovered over the dial to call 911, but I stopped. The police wouldn't understand. They would see a father comforting a sleeping child. They would say it was hearsay. They would say I was paranoid. Nia would spin this in court before the handcuffs even touched his wrists. No, I needed more. I needed undeniable concrete proof that would not just divorce him, but bury him and his entire leeching family. I watched him stand up and creep back towards the door. I hid the phone, closed my eyes, and waited. As Derek slid back into bed, wrapping his arm around my waist, I lay there in the dark, plotting the destruction of the man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. He had no idea that he had just declared war on a risk assessment director. And I never enter a war I don't intend to win. The morning sun that filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of our master bedroom should have signaled a fresh start, but as I lay there watching the dust motes dance in the light, I felt like I was waking up in a crime scene. Beside me, Derek was still asleep. His chest rose and fell with a rhythmic, peaceful cadence that made my stomach churn. Looking at his relaxed face, the face I had woken up to for 15 years, I felt a surge of violence so raw it terrified me. My hands clenched into fists under the high thread count sheets. I wanted to shake him awake. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag him out of this house by his hair and throw him onto the street where he belonged. Every instinct in my body, the primal mothering instinct that overrides all logic, was screaming at me to protect my cub and destroy the threat. But I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I am the director of risk assessment for a reason. I don't act on emotion. I act on leverage. And right now, despite the recording on my phone, I didn't have enough leverage to win the war he had just started. I had proof of his whispers, yes, but in a courtroom, a clever lawyer like Nia could spin that as a father comforting a troubled teen. I needed concrete, undeniable evidence of the conspiracy to defraud my daughter. I had to play the long game. I slid out of bed, moving with the same silence Derek had used only hours before. In the bathroom, I locked the door and turned the shower on cold. I stood under the freezing spray, letting the shock force my heart rate down, forcing my brain to switch from victim mode to predator mode. I wasn't a wife discovering a betrayal anymore. I was a CEO facing a hostile takeover. I dressed in my sharpest armor, a charcoal-tailored suit and stilettos that clicked like gunshots against the floorboards. When I walked into the kitchen, the atmosphere was already poisonous. Sophie was sitting at the island staring into a bowl of untouched cereal. She looked worse than she had the day before. Her skin was gray, her eyes hollowed out by exhaustion and the confused terror that Derek had planted in her mind during the night. "Good morning, Sophie," I said. My voice was calm, measured, giving away nothing of the horror I had witnessed on the screen just hours ago. I reached for the coffee pot, my movements deliberate. Sophie flinched so hard her spoon clattered onto the floor. She pushed her chair back, the legs screeching against the tile, and scrambled away from me until her back hit the refrigerator. "Don't come near me!" she screamed. Her voice cracked high and hysterical. I froze the coffee pot suspended in midair. "Sophie, what is wrong? You know what is wrong. You know what you did." Tears began to stream down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure fear. "You came into my room last night. You hit me. You said I was worthless and that you wished I was dead." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. The air left my lungs. It was working. The hypnosis, the suggestions, the repetitive whispers in the dark. Derek hadn't just planted a seed of doubt. He had successfully manufactured a false memory. My daughter actually believed I had abused her. I stared at her, my mind racing through the implications. If she told a school counselor this, if she told a doctor, Child Protective Services would be at my door within the hour. "Sophie, look at me." "I never entered your room last night," I said, keeping my voice level, though my insides were screaming. "Liar!" she shrieked, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Look at my arm! Look what you did!" She shoved up the sleeve of her pajama top. There on her upper arm was a fresh blossoming bruise. It was small, the size of a thumbprint. I stared at the mark. The room spun. I hadn't touched her. That meant Derek had pinched her. He had physically hurt our daughter in her sleep, timed perfectly with his whispers to create physical evidence of his narrative. He was a monster, a calculating sociopathic monster. Before I could speak, Derek rushed into the room. He was wearing his running clothes, looking flushed and energetic, the picture of a concerned father. "What is going on?" I heard screaming. He looked from Sophie to me, his eyes widening in mock horror. "Sophie, honey, come here." Sophie ran to him, burying her face in his shirt. "Daddy, she did it again. She hit me again. She lied and said she didn't, but she did." Derek wrapped his arms around her, looking at me over her trembling head. His expression shifted into a mask of pity and disappointment that was so perfectly executed it deserved an Academy Award. "Claire," he said softly, shaking his head. "We talked about this. You are losing time. You are blacking out." "I am not blacking out, Derek," I said. My voice was ice. I put the coffee pot down. "I didn't hit her. You know I didn't hit her." Derek sighed a long, weary sound that suggested he had been dealing with my insanity for years. "Look at her arm, Claire. The proof is right there. I woke up last night because I heard you walking around. I thought you were just getting water. But now—" He paused, tightening his grip on Sophie. "I think the stress is finally breaking you. You are hurting our daughter and you don't even remember doing it." He was gaslighting me in real time, using our daughter as a prop. He was building the narrative for the custody hearing. Mother is unstable. Mother is violent. Mother has dissociative episodes due to workplace stress. It was a textbook setup. If I screamed, if I defended myself with anger, I would only prove his point. A violent outburst now would be the final nail in my coffin. I looked at Sophie, her small body shaking in the arms of the man who was mentally destroying her. I wanted to rip him away from her. I wanted to play the recording right then and there, but I couldn't. Not yet. The recording showed him whispering yes, but it didn't show him pinching her. It didn't prove he made the bruise. A good defense attorney would argue he was whispering prayers or affirmations, and that the bruise happened at school. I needed to trap him. I needed him to admit it. I think. Derek continued, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I think you need to stay at a hotel for a few days, Claire, for Sophie's safety. And I think we need to make an appointment with Dr. Aris. You need a psychiatrist, Claire. You are dangerous." The word hung in the air. Dangerous. That was the legal keyword. That was the term that would appear in the affidavit. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the coffee I wouldn't get to drink. I picked up my purse from the counter. I didn't look at Sophie. I couldn't bear to see the fear in her eyes, knowing I couldn't fix it in this moment. I looked straight at Derek. I locked eyes with him, letting him see the absolute lack of emotion in my face. I didn't give him the tears he wanted. I didn't give him the fight he was recording on his mental highlight reel. "You might be right, Derek," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of effect. "Safety is the priority. I will stay at the Four Seasons tonight." Derek blinked. He hadn't expected me to agree. He had expected a meltdown. The surprise on his face was microscopic, but it was there. "Good," he stammered slightly. That is responsible of you." I walked to the door, my heels clicking a steady rhythm. I stopped with my hand on the handle and turned back. "Take good care of her, Derek. Make sure she gets plenty of rest. The mind can be a fragile thing." I walked out the door and into the garage. I got into my Mercedes, backed out of the driveway, and drove down the street with perfect precision. I didn't speed. I didn't cry. I waited until I was 3 blocks away, pulled into a side street and parked. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the private investigator I had used for corporate background checks. "I need a full sweep," I said into the phone. "Financials, phone records, gambling debts. And I need a forensic toxicologist. I want a hair follicle test on my daughter, but it has to be done without her father knowing." I looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. Derek thought he had won the battle this morning. He thought he had driven me out of my own castle. He didn't realize that by sending me away, he had just given me the freedom to sharpen my blade. He wanted a war. He was going to get an annihilation. The Obsidian was the kind of cafe where the menu didn't list prices, and the air smelled of imported leather and old money. It was neutral ground, or at least that is what Nia had claimed when she texted me the location. In reality, it was a power play. She knew I hated places like this, places that prioritized pretension over substance, but she also knew I would come. I arrived exactly 3 minutes late, a calculated move to show her that my time was more valuable than hers. Nia was already seated at a corner booth, the prime spot for being seen but not heard. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that I recognized from the latest Vogue spread, a suit that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. I knew for a fact she was 3 months behind on that mortgage because my private investigator had sent me the foreclosure warnings in her trash that morning. I slid into the booth opposite her. Nia didn't stand or offer a handshake. She just smirked, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the rim of a crystal flute. Champagne at 11 a.m. She was celebrating. "You look tired, Claire," Nia said, her voice dripping with that faux sympathy she had perfected in family court. "The bags under your eyes are designer, I hope." I ignored the jab and placed my phone face down on the table. It was recording, capturing every frequency in the room. "I am fine, Nia. What is this about? You said it was urgent regarding Sophie." Nia signaled the waiter without looking at him. "Bring us the seafood tower, the large one, and another bottle of this Dom Perignon. My sister-in-law is paying." She flashed a smile at the waiter, then turned her predatory gaze back to me. She didn't ask if I wanted anything. She didn't ask if I was hungry. She just spent my money because she felt entitled to it. That was Nia in a nutshell. She believed the world owed her a living, and I was the designated payer. "It is about Sophie," Nia said, leaning forward. She lowered her voice, shifting from the socialite sister to the ruthless attorney. "We need to talk about the incident this morning, the physical abuse." I didn't flinch. "There was no abuse, Nia. You know that. Derek knows that." Nia tutted, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what I know, Claire. It matters what the court sees. And right now the court would see a high-strung absentee mother who snapped under pressure and assaulted her teenage daughter. I have seen the bruise, Claire. It is nasty. Sophie is terrified of you." She paused to let the waiter place the tiered silver platter of lobster, oysters, and crab between us. She picked up a crab leg, cracking it loudly. The sound echoed like a breaking bone. "Here is the situation." Nia continued, pointing a piece of crab meat at me. "The family has met. We are very concerned about your mental stability. Beatrice thinks you are having a breakdown. Derek thinks you are dangerous, and as their legal counsel, I am inclined to agree. We are prepared to file for emergency custody this afternoon, an ex parte order. That means you won't even get a hearing before the judge signs it. You will be removed from the home and Sophie will be placed in Derek's sole care." I watched her eat my hands folded calmly on the table. Inside, my mind was racing, analyzing the legal strategy. An ex parte order required immediate, irreparable harm. They were banking on the bruise and Sophie's testimony to bypass due process. However, Nia wiped her mouth with a linen napkin. "We want to be merciful. We don't want to ruin your reputation publicly. Think about what a child abuse scandal would do to your position at the venture capital firm. Investors don't like volatility. So I have drawn up an alternative." She reached into her oversized Hermes bag, which I also knew was a high-quality counterfeit, and pulled out a thick document. She slid it across the table, pushing aside a half-eaten oyster. "This is a voluntary relinquishment of custody," Nia said. "You sign over full guardianship to Derek. You agree to supervised visits only. In exchange, we don't file the police report. We keep this a private family matter." I looked at the document. The paper was heavy, expensive bond. I flipped to the second page, scanning the text with the speed of someone who reads contracts for a living. I stopped at Clause 14b. In the event of voluntary relinquishment, the acting guardian assumes full administrative control over all assets held in trust for the minor child. There it was. The money shot. Literally. They didn't care about Sophie's safety. They didn't care about my mental health. They wanted the $50 million trust fund. If I signed this, Derek would have legal access to the funds to manage Sophie's lifestyle. They would drain that account dry in 5 years. I looked up at Nia. She was watching me closely, her eyes glittering with greed. She wasn't eating anymore. She was waiting for the kill, Clause 14B, I said, tapping the paper. You want control of the trust. Nia shrugged, taking a sip of champagne. Raising a child like Sophie is expensive, Claire, especially since she will need extensive therapy to recover from your abuse. Derek needs resources to provide her with the stability you couldn't give her. You are just a checkbook to her anyway. Why not make it official? The insult was designed to make me angry. She wanted me to rip the paper up to throw a drink in her face. That would be assault. That would be more evidence. Instead, I leaned back, channeling the icy demeanor of a woman who decides the fate of companies with a stroke of a pen. You think I am a checkbook? I asked softly. Nia laughed, a harsh barking sound. Look at you, Claire. You are cold. You are sterile. You think love is something you can buy. You think because you paid for the house and the cars and the vacations that you are a parent. You are not. You are an ATM. Derek is the one who loves her. I am the one who protects her. We are the real family. You are just the donor. So do the right thing. Sign the paper. Go back to your spreadsheets and your empty office. Let real people raise your daughter. I stared at her. For a moment, I actually admired her audacity. She was sitting there eating a $400 lunch on my dime, wearing a suit she couldn't afford, telling me I was worthless while demanding access to my fortune. It was the epitome of parasitic behavior. I reached for the document. Nia's eyes widened. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken me. I pulled a pen from my purse. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black. I hovered the pen over the signature line. If I sign this, I said, you promise no police report. Nia nodded eagerly. Absolutely. It goes away. We just want peace. I lowered the pen, but I didn't sign. Instead, I drew a large, bold X across the entire page. Then I ripped the document in half. Nia gasped, dropping her champagne flute. It didn't break, but the expensive liquid spilled across the table, soaking the tablecloth. What are you doing? She hissed. You stupid bitch, you just declared war. No, Nia, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that made CEOs sweat during audits. I didn't declare war. I just declined your settlement offer. You see, I know about the gambling debts. I know about your foreclosure notice. I know that you and Derek are desperate for cash because the sharks are circling. You don't care about Sophie. You need her money to save your own skins. Nia's face turned a violent shade of red. She stood up, knocking the table. You have no proof. And even if you did, no one will believe you. You are the abuser. We have the bruise. We have the witness. We will bury you, Claire. I will make sure you never see your daughter again. She grabbed her bag, her hands shaking with rage. I am filing that motion, and I am adding a defamation suit. You are done. She turned to storm out, but the waiter appeared holding a leather folder. The bill. Nia stopped. She looked at the waiter, then at me. I am not paying for this. She spat. I looked at the waiter, then at Nia. I smiled. A genuine cold smile. Of course not. You can't afford it. I took the folder. I pulled out my black American Express card, the titanium one. I placed it in the folder and handed it to the waiter. Add a 20% tip, I told him, and pack up the rest of the seafood for the lady. She might need it later. I turned back to Nia. She was frozen, caught between humiliation and fury. Enjoy the lunch, Nia, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. Truly, savor it. Because where you are going, the menu is much more limited, and they definitely don't serve Dom Perignon. What is that supposed to mean? Nia demanded, her voice rising. I leaned in close, whispering just like Derek had whispered to Sophie. It means I recorded everything. The blackmail, the extortion attempt, the admission that this is about money. Last meals are usually the best, Nia. I hope this one was worth it. I walked past her, brushing against her shoulder. I didn't look back. I could hear her sputtering, trying to regain her composure as the other patrons stared. I walked out of the obsidian and into the bright, blinding sunlight. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had the recording. I had the motive. Now I just needed to survive the next 48 hours until the trap snapped shut. Nia thought she was the shark in the tank. She didn't realize she had just taken bait from a megalodon. The house was silent, a hollow kind of silence that usually signifies a lazy Sunday afternoon. but today it felt like the breath held before a sniper takes a shot. Derek had just left with Sophie. He told me he was taking her to Dr. Aris for an emergency session to process the trauma of my alleged abuse. I knew better. The GPS tracker on his Audi, which I had installed 6 months ago for insurance purposes, showed them heading straight for the upscale business district where Nia had her office. They weren't going to therapy. They were going to a war council. They were likely coaching Sophie on what to say to the court-appointed guardian, rehearsing the lies that would strip me of my rights. I didn't pace the floor. I didn't drink wine to calm my nerves. I walked into my home office and locked the door. This room was my sanctuary, a space of chrome and glass where I had built my career. I sat down at my triple monitor setup and dialed a number that wasn't in my contacts list. It belonged to Marcus, a former forensic accountant for the SEC who had pivoted to high-end cybersecurity. Marcus was the guy you called when the numbers didn't add up and you suspected someone was cooking the books. He owed me a favor from a botched merger deal I had saved him from 3 years ago. "I need a deep dive, Marcus," I said as soon as he picked up. "No pleasantries. Derek and his sister Naya. I need everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, offshore holdings, crypto wallets. If they bought a pack of gum in 1999, I want to know about it. And I need it fast." "Give me 20 minutes, Marcus said. His voice was the sound of typing keys. I sat there watching the clock on my screen. Every second that ticked by was a second Derek was pouring poison into my daughter's ear. I forced myself to breathe. In my line of work, we have a saying, follow the money. People lie. Emotions deceive. But numbers are brutally honest. If Derek and Naya were escalating this fast, going from passive aggression to full-blown legal warfare in 48 hours, there had to be a catalyst. People don't risk jail time for perjury unless the alternative is worse. The screen pinged. Marcus requested a secure video link. I accepted, and his face appeared on one monitor, while streams of data began cascading down the other two. "You are going to want to sit down for this, Claire," Marcus said, his face grim. "It is ugly. Show me," I commanded. "Let's start with the sister." "Nia." Marcus highlighted a column of red numbers. "She plays the part of the high-powered attorney, right? Well, it is all smoke and mirrors. Her law firm is bleeding cash. She lost 3 major corporate clients in the last quarter due to negligence. She is currently being sued for malpractice by a former client, a case she is settling out of court to keep quiet. But here is the kicker. Her lifestyle hasn't changed. I scanned the credit card statements Marcus pulled up. Leased Mercedes G-Wagon, 5-star vacations to St. Bart's, designer wardrobe, private club memberships. She is living on credit. I observed. She is drowning in it, Marcus corrected. She has 18 credit cards maxed out. She has taken out a second and third mortgage on her condo. She is technically insolvent, Claire. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on her home 2 weeks ago. She has 30 days to come up with $200,000, or she is on the street. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile touching my lips. So that explained Nia's aggression. That explained why she was so desperate to act as the legal counsel for the trust fund. She needed the administration fees. She needed to bill the trust for her billable hours at exorbitant rates. She was looking at my daughter's inheritance as her personal bailout package. "But what about Derek?" I asked. "He doesn't have a mortgage. I pay for everything. He has no expenses." Marcus hesitated. He typed a few commands and a new window opened. It was a dark web interface showing transaction logs from servers based in Malta and Curacao. "Derek doesn't have expenses," Marcus said slowly. "He has a habit. A very expensive, very addictive habit." I looked at the screen. Online gambling. Not just poker or sports betting, but high-stakes crypto casinos. The kind that aren't regulated in the U.S. The kind where you can lose a house in a single spin. He started small about 2 years ago. Marcus explained, tracing the graph. But in the last 6 months, he spiraled. He has been chasing his losses, Claire. He would lose 10 grand, then bet 20 to try and win it back. He drained the joint savings account you two have. I checked the balance on my phone. The account I rarely looked at, the one I kept for emergencies. It was empty. $50,000 gone. "That is just the tip of the iceberg," Marcus said. "He borrowed money. Not from banks. Banks wouldn't touch him with his credit score. He borrowed from loan sharks operating through shell companies in Nevada, hard money lenders, the kind who don't send letters when you miss a payment. They send guys with baseball bats. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. How much, Marcus? Total liability is just over $2 million, Marcus said, and the interest is compounding daily. He has a balloon payment due next week, $500,000. If he doesn't pay, things are going to get physical. I stared at the number. $2 million. My husband, the man who lectured me about spiritual wealth and the evils of materialism, had gambled away a fortune he didn't have. Suddenly, the entire picture snapped into focus like a high-resolution photograph. This wasn't about custody. This wasn't about me being a bad mother. This was a robbery, a desperate, terrified robbery. Derek and Nia were cornered animals. Nia was about to lose her home. Derek was likely fearing for his life from the loan sharks. They looked at Sophie, and they didn't see a niece or a daughter. They saw a $50 million piggy bank. Their plan was terrifyingly simple. Step 1, gaslight Sophie and frame me for abuse to get me out of the picture. Step 2, secure emergency custody so Derek becomes the legal guardian. Step 3, petition the court to access the trust fund for the welfare and maintenance of the child. They would argue that Sophie needed specialized care, private security, a new environment to heal from her trauma. They would bleed the trust dry, paying off their debts and hiding it under the guise of parental expenses. They were going to sacrifice my daughter's mental health, ruin her relationship with her mother, and destroy her future just to cover their own failures. I felt a wave of nausea followed immediately by a surge of pure crystallized rage. They had made a fatal error in their calculations. They assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. They assumed that because I loved my family, I was blind. They didn't realize that in the world of venture capital, I was known as the grim reaper of bad investments, and my husband had just become a toxic asset. I looked at the screen again. "Can you package this?" I asked Marcus. "Can you create a portfolio that traces every dollar, every bet, every lie? I need it to be admissible in court. I need it to be bulletproof. I can have a full forensic report ready in 24 hours. Marcus said. "But Claire, be careful. If these loan sharks are real, Derek is desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things." "I know," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "That is why I am going to let him think he is winning. I am going to let him walk into the courtroom thinking he is the king of the world. And then I am going to introduce him to reality." I ended the call. The screen went black, reflecting my own face. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a hunter. I picked up my phone and saw a text from Derek. "Sophie is doing well with Dr. Aris. She is so brave. We might go grab ice cream after. Don't wait up." I typed a reply, my fingers steady. "Take your time. She deserves a treat. I am just resting at the hotel. Thank you for being such a good dad." I hit send. Let him feel safe. Let him think the sheep is sleeping while the wolf circles. He had no idea that the sheep was currently loading a sniper rifle. I had the motive. I had the financial trail. Now I just needed the final piece of the puzzle, the undeniable proof that he was coaching her. The birthday party was in 2 days. It was the perfect stage, and I was going to make sure it was a performance no one would ever forget. The drive back from the hotel was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going home to pack. Marcus's report had made one thing crystal clear. I could not stay under the same roof as Derek without risking my freedom or my life. If he was desperate enough to gaslight our daughter into believing I was an abuser, he was desperate enough to stage an accident. I needed my passport, my hard drives, and the safe deposit box key that was hidden in the back of my walk-in closet. But when I pulled into the driveway of the estate I had purchased 3 years ago, I didn't see a welcoming porch light. I saw the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser reflecting off the facade of my home. My stomach dropped, but my pulse remained steady. Panic is a luxury I cannot afford. I parked my Mercedes behind the squad car and stepped out. The evening air was cool, but the heat radiating from the front door was palpable. I walked up the stone path, the heels of my boots clicking a sharp, rhythmic warning. I reached for my keys, selecting the gold-plated key that opened the custom oak double doors. I slid it into the lock. It stopped halfway. I pushed. Nothing. I jiggled it. Nothing. The lock had been changed. In the 4 hours I had been gone, someone had called a locksmith, paid a rush fee, and physically barred me from my own property. Before I could knock, the door swung open. It wasn't Derek. It was Beatrice. My mother-in-law stood in the entryway of my house, wearing a silk robe that I had bought for guests. She looked at me not with fear, but with a smug, triumphant sneer that made my skin crawl. "You can't come in here," Beatrice announced, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I looked at her, then past her into the foyer. I could see the police officer standing by the stairs, his hand resting on his belt. "Beatrice, this is my house," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You are a guest. Step aside. Not anymore," she spat. "You forfeited your rights when you hurt my granddaughter. We are protecting her now." The police officer stepped forward. He was young, likely a rookie, looking uncomfortable but determined to follow protocol. "Ma'am, are you Claire?" he asked. "I am," I replied, not taking my eyes off Beatrice. He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. "Ma'am, I have been instructed to serve you with this temporary restraining order. It was filed electronically by your husband's attorney this afternoon. It states that you are to remain at least 500 yards away from your daughter Sophie and your husband Derek, pending a hearing on Thursday. Since they are currently residing in this domicile, you are in violation of the order by being on the premises." I took the paper. My hands didn't shake. I scanned the legal jargon. Nia had been busy. She had found a sympathetic judge, likely one of her old law school connections, and pushed this through based on the affidavit of immediate danger. The document was a masterpiece of fiction, painting me as a volatility risk with a history of violent outbursts. So, I am being evicted. I asked the officer, looking up from the paper, "Based on a lie?" The officer shifted his weight. "Ma'am, I can't comment on the validity of the claims. That is for the judge to decide. My job is just to enforce the order. You need to leave. If you don't, I will have to place you under arrest for trespassing in violation of a court order." Beatrice laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. "Did you hear that, Claire? Trespassing in your own fancy house. You thought your money made you untouchable, but you can't buy the law. Derek is the head of this household now. He is the guardian. You are just a danger to society. Go back to your hotel. Or better yet, go to a mental ward." I looked at Beatrice. She was standing on the Persian rug I had imported from Istanbul. She was holding a mug of tea from my collection. She truly believed she had won. She thought this piece of paper was a shield. She didn't understand that she was standing inside a corporate asset. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in my purse. I looked at the officer. "Officer, I will comply with your order to retreat from the protected persons. However, for your body camera footage and your report, I want to state the following. This property is not marital assets. It is held by CPV Holdings LLC, of which I am the sole proprietor. By changing the locks without the owner's consent, Mr. Derek has committed an illegal lockout of a commercial landlord. I am leaving now to de-escalate, but note that unauthorized occupants are currently damaging corporate property." The officer blinked, confused by the shift from domestic dispute to property law. I will note your statement, ma'am." I turned my gaze back to Beatrice. Her smile faltered slightly. She didn't understand what an LLC was. She just knew she had the keys. "You think you have won, Beatrice?" I said, my voice devoid of anger, sounding more like I was reading a weather report. "You think locking me out keeps you safe, but you are locked in here with a man who owes $2 million to people who break legs for a living. You are locked in here with a mortgage that requires $10,000 a month in upkeep." I stepped off the porch, walking backward slowly. "Enjoy the house, Beatrice," I called out. "Sleep in the master bedroom. Use the expensive sheets. Drink the wine. Because when the dust settles, this house is going to be the only thing shielding you from the storm that is coming." I walked to my car, opened the door, and got in. As I reversed out of the driveway, I saw Beatrice slam the heavy oak door shut. She locked it. I heard the deadbolt slide home. Click. She had just locked herself inside the trap. I didn't need to get my hard drives. I had cloud backups. I didn't need my passport. I wasn't running. I drove away into the night, the red and blue lights fading in my rearview mirror. They had taken my home. They had taken my daughter. But they had also made a critical tactical error. They had removed the only person in that house who knew how to generate income. They were sitting on a ticking time bomb of debt, and they had just kicked out the bomb squad. I reached for my phone and dialed Marcus. "Initiate phase 2, I said. "Freeze the joint accounts and send the anonymous tip to the loan sharks. Tell them Derek is trying to flee the country with his daughter's trust fund. Let's see how safe they feel in my house when the wolves come knocking." The suite at the St. Regis was silent, a sharp contrast to the chaotic noise that I knew was currently filling my home. I had set up a command center on the mahogany dining table overlooking the city skyline. 3 laptops were open, humming softly, while a pot of black coffee sat cooling by my right hand. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't weeping into a pillow. I was working. While Derek and his family thought I was cowering in shame, effectively exiled from my own life, I was actually orchestrating their destruction with the precision of a surgeon. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from my American Express app. Another transaction approved. This time it was $4,000 at an electronics store, a home theater system. 10 minutes earlier, it had been $2,000 at a high-end liquor store. Before that, $600 for a catering delivery from the city's most expensive steakhouse. They were throwing a party, a victory party. They were celebrating the successful eviction of the woman who paid for the roof over their heads, and they were doing it using her own credit cards. Most people would have called the bank immediately. Most people would have screamed fraud and shut down the cards to save money. But I am not most people. I am a woman who understands that in order to catch a rat, you have to leave the cheese out. I watched the notifications roll in with a detached, cold satisfaction. Every swipe of that card was another nail in their coffin. I had deliberately left the supplementary cards active. I had even called this bank manager a personal friend and instructed him to override any fraud alerts for the next 48 hours. I needed the spending to cross a specific threshold. I needed it to go from petty theft to grand larceny. I needed them to purchase items that crossed state lines to trigger federal jurisdiction. When Derek bought that imported wine online, he unknowingly committed wire fraud. When Nia used the card to book a flight for next week, she handed me a felony charge on a silver platter. I wasn't losing money. I was investing in their incarceration. The room grew darker as the sun set, but the glow of my screens kept me company. Then a different notification sound pierced the silence. It was a text message. My heart, usually a steady drum of logic, skipped a beat. It was from Sophie. I opened the message, bracing myself. The text bubble was long filled with capitalization and angry emojis. "You are a devil. I hate you. Do not ever try to find me. Daddy told me you only care about your money. You are disgusting. I hope you die alone." I stared at the words. They were brutal, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. A week ago, this would have broken me. I would have called her sobbing, begging for forgiveness. But tonight, I looked at the text through the lens of an analyst. The syntax was wrong. Sophie didn't use words like disgusting or devil. She used teenage slang. She didn't use perfect punctuation. And she certainly didn't refer to Derek as daddy anymore. She had called him dad since she turned 12. This wasn't a message from my daughter. It was a message dictated by Derek, typed by her fingers under duress or manipulation. I didn't reply. Engaging would only give them fuel to show the court. Look, she is harassing the child. Instead, I took a screenshot. I logged it into the folder marked Evidence. I saved it alongside the credit card statements and the transcript of Derek's whispers. Then the email I had been waiting for arrived. The subject line was simply Confidential Lab Results. My hand hovered over the mouse. This was the variable that terrified me the most. Before I had been forced out of the house before the restraining order, I had asked our private family concierge doctor to stop by Sophie's school under the guise of a routine athletic physical. I had instructed him to take a hair follicle sample. I needed to know why Sophie was so compliant, why she was sleeping so heavily that Derek could whisper into her ear for hours without waking her. I clicked open the PDF. The medical terminology was dense, but the summary at the bottom was clear enough for a layman to understand. Positive for benzodiazepines. High concentration. Chronic exposure indicated over the last 6 months. The air left the room. The silence of the hotel suite suddenly felt deafening. I read it again. Benzodiazepines. Sedatives. Strong ones. The kind used to treat severe anxiety or insomnia, the kind that caused memory loss, confusion, and suggestibility. Derek wasn't just using hypnosis. He was chemically subduing our daughter. He was crushing heavy tranquilizers into her food or drink, likely the warm milk he insisted on bringing her every night as part of his Father of the Year act. A cold, white-hot fury washed over me, different from the anger I had felt before. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about the house or the betrayal. This was about the physical poisoning of my child. My hands, which had been steady all night, curled into fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. He had drugged her. He had turned my brilliant, sharp-witted daughter into a zombie so he could rob her blind. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights blurred before my eyes. I realized then that Derek and Nia had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They thought they were fighting a divorce battle. They thought they were fighting a custody dispute. They didn't realize they had just escalated this to a criminal investigation involving child endangerment and poisoning. I went back to the desk and forwarded the lab report to Marcus. I added a note. This changes the timeline. We are not waiting for the hearing on Thursday. We are striking at the birthday party. Ensure the police are present, but keep them in the perimeter until I give the signal. I want Derek to feel safe right up until the moment the handcuffs click. I looked at the credit card alerts again. Another $500 at a gourmet bakery. A birthday cake. They were buying a birthday cake for Sophie, using my money to celebrate a birthday I was banned from attending while my daughter sat there with drugs in her veins, unable to think clearly. Enjoy the cake, Derek. I whispered to the empty room. Eat every crumb, because it is going to be the last sweet thing you taste for 20 years. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to see anymore. The plan was set. I had the financial trail. I had the recordings. And now I had the medical proof of abuse. I wasn't just going to win custody. I was going to obliterate them. I lay down on the hotel bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I visualized the party. I visualized the look on Nia's face when her law license evaporated. I visualized Derek's face when he realized that the wife he called a checkbook was actually the judge, jury, and executioner. The countdown had begun. The courier arrived at my hotel suite at 7 a.m. He didn't look me in the eye when he handed me the thick manila envelope stamped with the seal of the family court. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Nia was moving faster than I had anticipated. She wasn't waiting for the restraining order hearing on Thursday. She was going for the throat. I ripped open the tab and slid out the document. It was a motion for involuntary termination of parental rights. The language was brutal, citing irreparable psychological damage and immediate danger to the child. But the real kicker was the hearing date. They had scheduled an emergency ex parte hearing for this afternoon. That meant they intended to strip me of my title as Sophie's mother before the sun went down without me even being present to defend myself. I sat at the hotel desk, my hand resting on the cool glass of water I hadn't drunk. This was the ultimatum. They were forcing me into a corner where my only options were to be publicly branded a child abuser by a judge who was likely golfing buddies with Nia's senior partner, or to surrender on their terms. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call my lawyer. I called Nia. "I am coming to your office," I said the moment she picked up. "Good," Nia replied, her voice smooth and dripping with false sweetness. "We have a settlement to discuss. Bring a pen, Claire. And try not to look too disheveled. We have clients in the building." I spent the next hour transforming myself. I washed off my makeup, leaving my face pale and drawn. I chose a dress that was slightly too big, making me look frail and diminished. I didn't brush my hair into its usual sleek chignon. I let it hang limp around my shoulders. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the director of risk assessment. I saw a broken woman. I saw the victim they wanted me to be. Nia's office was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of building that screams prestige to people who don't understand that the rent is 3 months overdue. The receptionist looked bored, and the waiting room was empty, a subtle sign that Nia's firm was hemorrhaging clients. When I walked back to her corner office, Derek was already there. He was sitting in a leather chair, looking out the window, refusing to make eye contact. Nia sat behind her massive oak desk, flanked by stacks of legal books that looked like they had never been opened. "Sit down, Claire," Nia commanded, pointing to a low chair that forced me to look up at her. I sat, keeping my hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide the fact that they were perfectly steady. I forced a tremor into my shoulders. "Please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Please don't take her away from me. I will do anything." Nia exchanged a look with Derek, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "We are just doing what is best for Sophie Claire." Nia said, her tone shifting into a lecturing cadence. "You have to understand something about family, real family. It isn't about checks and balances. It isn't about trust funds or private schools. It is about warmth. It is about soul." She stood up and walked around the desk, looming over me. "The problem with you, Claire, is that you are culturally and emotionally bankrupt. You are the stereotypical cold white woman. You think you can solve problems with logic and money. You think buying her a pony makes you a mother. But you don't know how to nurture. You don't have the capacity for deep, messy, real love. You are sterile inside." I flinched, not because the words hurt, but because I needed them to think they did. I lowered my head, staring at the carpet. "I love her," I mumbled. "Do you?" Nia challenged. "Or do you just view her as an asset, a reflection of your own ego?" "Derek tells me everything, Claire. He tells me how you critique her grades, how you manage her schedule like a project. That isn't love. That is management. Sophie needs a mother who can hold her, not audit her." Derek finally turned around. He looked sad, his eyes filled with a manufactured grief. "Nia is right, Claire," he said softly. "You are too intense. You are suffocating her. Last night she cried for hours. She said she is afraid of you. She said your eyes look like shark eyes. Dead, empty." I dug my nails into my palms. Shark eyes. That was a line from a movie we had watched 3 months ago. Sophie wouldn't say that. Derek was scripting her. "So what do you want?" I asked, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. Nia walked back to her desk and slapped a document down in front of me. It was different from the one at the restaurant. This was final. "We want you to sign this voluntary relinquishment of custody," Nia said. "It grants Derek full permanent guardianship. You waive all rights to visitation. You waive all rights to contest decisions regarding her education, her health, and her finances." "And the trust fund?" I asked, keeping my voice trembling. Nia waved her hand dismissively. "That is a separate issue. As guardian, Derek will obviously need to access those funds to provide the care Sophie needs. But that is administrative. Focus on the child, Claire. If you sign this," Nia continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "we cancel the hearing. No public record of abuse, no police investigation. You walk away with your career intact. You can go back to your spreadsheets and your empty life, and we will take the burden of raising Sophie off your hands." I stared at the paper. It was a death warrant for my relationship with my daughter. If I signed this legally, I was a stranger to her. I picked up the pen. My hand shook violently. I let the pen hover over the paper. "I will sign it," I said, my voice barely audible. Nia smiled. It was the smile of a predator who just felt the trap snap shut. "Smart choice, Claire." But I added, pulling the paper back slightly, "I have one condition." Nia's smile faltered. "What condition?" "Sophie's 16th birthday," I said. "It is next week. I want to see her. I want to say goodbye." Derek stood up immediately. "No, absolutely not. The order says no contact." "Please," I begged, looking at Derek with wide, desperate eyes. "Just 1 hour, just to give her my gift and tell her that I love her. Then I will disappear. I promise. I will move to London. I will never bother you again. I can't leave without seeing her face one last time." I let a sob escape my throat. I buried my face in my hands. I am begging you, Derek. As her mother, please. Silence filled the room. I could feel them calculating. They were weighing the risk. Nia looked at Derek. Let her come, Nia Derek warned. It is actually better this way, Nia argued, speaking as if I wasn't there. If Sophie sees her looking like this broken, pathetic weak, it will reinforce everything we have told her. It will be closure for Sophie, too. She can see with her own eyes that her mother is giving up. She turned to me. Fine, you can come to the party. 1 hour. You give her the gift, you say your goodbyes, and you leave, but you sign this now, and we hold on to it. If you try anything funny at the party, I file this immediately, and I call the police. I nodded vigorously. Thank you. Thank you, Nia. I put the pen to the paper. I didn't read the clauses. I didn't check the fine print. I scrawled my signature at the bottom of the page, making it look shaky and uneven. Nia snatched the paper away the second the ink was dry. She held it up like a trophy. Done, she announced. You made the right choice, Claire. Finally. She looked at me with pure disdain. You know, for a moment I was worried you would be difficult. But you are just like every other woman who married up. You crumble when the credit card gets declined. I stood up, grabbing my purse. I kept my head down, shoulders slumped. I just want her to be happy, I whispered. Then leave, Derek said coldly. Go back to your hotel. We will see you next week. And Claire, don't dress like a funeral. Try to look like a human being for once. I walked out of the office, shuffling my feet. I passed the bored receptionist. I walked to the elevator. I waited for the doors to close. As soon as the metal doors slid shut, sealing me in the private silence of the elevator car, my posture snapped back into place. My spine straightened. The tremor in my hands vanished instantly. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small, high-fidelity recording device I had taped to the back of my phone. I hit stop. They had it all. The coercion, the insults, the admission that they were manipulating Sophie's perception of me, and most importantly, they had granted me access to the party. They thought they had just coerced a surrender. In reality, they had just signed their own invitation to a federal raid. I looked at my reflection in the elevator's polished brass. The pale, broken woman was gone. The director was back. You called me an emotionless white woman, Nia, I said to the empty elevator. You are about to find out exactly how cold I can be. You wanted me to say goodbye, I will. But I won't be saying goodbye to my daughter. I will be saying goodbye to you. The elevator dinged at the lobby. I walked out putting on my sunglasses. I had a week to prepare, a week to coordinate with Marcus, a week to brief the private security team I was hiring to extract Sophie. Nia thought she was holding the deed to my life. She didn't realize she was holding a grenade, and I had just pulled the pin. The night before Sophie's 16th birthday, the air in my hotel suite was thick enough to choke on. I wasn't sleeping. Sleep was a luxury for people who didn't have to dismantle their entire lives to save their children. I sat in the darkness, illuminated only by the blue glow of my laptop screen and the amber standby light of the external hard drive I had connected. I had spent the last 6 hours upgrading my surveillance capabilities. The camera inside the teddy bear was good, but it wasn't enough for a court of law. I needed studio-quality audio. I needed to hear the breath in his lungs before he lied. So earlier that day, I had bribed a cleaning crew member to let me into my own house for exactly 4 minutes while Derek was out buying party supplies. I had planted high-fidelity listening devices behind the headboard of Sophie's bed and inside the smoke detector. Now sitting miles away in the St. Regis, I put on my noise-canceling headphones and waited. The digital clock on my screen read 1:58 a.m., right on schedule. I watched the waveform on my audio software spike before I even saw the movement on the video feed. The door to Sophie's room creaked open. Derek stepped inside. On the night vision camera, he looked like a distorted caricature of the man I had married. His eyes were wide manic, scanning the room for invisible threats. He wasn't wearing his pajamas. He was fully dressed in jeans and a black t-shirt, as if he was prepared to run at a moment's notice. In his hand, he held a glass of warm milk and a folded piece of paper. I leaned in, turning the volume up to the maximum. The audio was crystal clear. I could hear the fabric of his jeans rustle as he sat down on the edge of Sophie's bed. He placed the milk on the nightstand, the milk that I now knew was laced with benzodiazepines, and shook Sophie's shoulder gently. "Sophie, honey, wake up. Daddy needs to talk to you." Sophie groaned, shifting under the duvet. Her movements were sluggish, heavy. The drugs were doing their job. She blinked up at him, her eyes struggling to focus in the dark. "Dad, what time is it?" "It is time to prepare Sophie," Derek whispered. His voice wasn't the soothing tone of a father. It was the urgent, pressurized tone of a handler prepping an asset. "Tomorrow is the big day. The party. Remember what we talked about?" Sophie rubbed her eyes, looking confused. "The party?" "Yeah, Mom is coming." Derek stiffened. The waveform on my screen jumped as his voice grew sharper. "That is exactly what we need to talk about. Mom is coming, but not because she loves you. She is coming to trick you. She is coming to drag you away from me and Aunt Nia. She wants to put you in that facility, remember? The one with the padded walls." I watched my daughter's face crumble. The fear that flashed across her features was genuine, a Pavlovian response he had conditioned into her over weeks of psychological torture. "I don't want to go," Sophie whimpered. "Then you have to perform, Sophie," Derek said, grabbing her hand. "You have to be perfect. When she walks into that garden, I need you to cry. I need real tears. You have to scream if she tries to touch you. You have to tell everyone, the guests, the caterers, the cameras, that she hit you again. Can you do that for Daddy?" I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This wasn't just parental alienation. This was witness tampering. He was scripting a crime scene. "But I feel sick." Sophie mumbled, her head lolling to the side. "The medicine makes me so tired." "You can rest after we win," Derek urged, pressing the glass of milk into her hand. "Drink this. It will help you focus. And listen to me. If you do this right, if you make her leave, everything changes." He pulled the folded paper from his pocket and smoothed it out on the duvet. "Look at this, Sophie. This is the brochure for that equestrian center in France, the one with the white horses. If we win tomorrow, if we get the trust fund unlocked, we are moving there, just you and me. No Mom, no yelling, just riding horses in the countryside. We will buy you the stallion you wanted. We will travel all over Europe. But we need the money, Sophie. And the only way to get the money is to get rid of her." He was bribing her with her own inheritance. He was selling her a fantasy funded by the very fortune he intended to steal. I watched Sophie look at the brochure, her eyes glassy. She was fighting the sedation, fighting the confusion, trying to find a tether to reality. "France," she whispered. "Yes, France," Derek promised. "But first you need to sign this." He produced a pen and another document, likely a statement of intent or a request for a guardian ad litem. "Sign it, Sophie. It says, you are afraid of your mother and you want to live with me in Europe." Sophie took the pen. Her hand hovered over the paper. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Don't sign it, baby. Please fight him." But she was 15, drugged and desperate for approval. She scribbled something on the line. Derek snatched the paper away instantly, tucking it into his pocket like a winning lottery ticket. "Good girl," he said, stroking her hair. "You saved us." He stood up to leave, evidently satisfied with his night's work. But then Sophie spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, so faint I had to boost the gain on the audio track to hear it. "Dad." Derek paused at the door, impatient. "What is it, Sophie? Go back to sleep. Does she really hate me?" The question hung in the silence of the room, heavy and heartbreaking. It was the question of a child who had been systematically broken down, whose sense of self-worth had been shredded by the two people supposed to protect her. She sounded so small, so alone. I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment of truth. A normal father, even a flawed one, would have softened. He would have said, "No, she loves you in her own way." But Derek wasn't a father. He was a parasite. He turned back to her, his face illuminated by the hallway light. I saw his expression clearly on the HD camera. It was a sneer of absolute contempt. He walked back to the bed, leaned down, and looked her right in the eyes. Hate is a strong word, Sophie, but let's be honest. She looks at you and she sees a mistake. She sees a burden. Why do you think she works so much? To get away from you. She doesn't love you, Sophie. She only loves her money. And she hates that you are the one standing between her and that trust fund. He paused, letting the cruelty sink in. If I wasn't here to protect you, she would have discarded you years ago. Never forget that. She is the monster. I am the only one who cares. Now sleep. He turned and walked out, closing the door. The waveform flatlined. The room was silent again except for the sound of my daughter sobbing softly into her pillow. I sat there in the hotel suite, frozen. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the sheer force of the adrenaline flooding my system. He had said it. He had said the unforgivable. He had confirmed on a high-fidelity recording that he was actively isolating the child, lying about my affections, and admitting that the motivation was financial. She stands between her and that trust fund. That sentence alone was enough to bury him. But the emotional abuse telling a vulnerable, drugged teenager that her mother wished she was never born, that was the nail in the coffin. I didn't cry. Tears were useless now. I hit the stop recording button. Then I hit save. I named the file Exhibit A, The Midnight Confession. I uploaded it to the cloud. I emailed a copy to Marcus. I saved another copy to an encrypted USB drive. I looked at the screen where Sophie was crying. I reached out and touched the pixels of her face. "Cry tonight, baby," I whispered to the screen. "Let it out. Because tomorrow you aren't going to be the victim anymore. Tomorrow you are going to watch your father burn." I stood up and walked to the minibar. I poured a glass of water and drank it in one long gulp. My mind was crystal clear. The doubt was gone. The guilt was gone. Any lingering affection I had for the man I married had evaporated the moment he told our daughter I saw her as a mistake. I looked at the layout of the garden party that Marcus had obtained from the catering company. I marked the exits. I marked the position where the projector screen would be. I marked the spot where the police officers would be waiting in unmarked cars. Derek wanted a show. He wanted a performance. He wanted tears. Well, I was going to give him the greatest show of his life. I checked the time. 2:30 a.m. The sun would be up in 4 hours. The party started at noon. I went to the closet and pulled out my outfit for tomorrow. I didn't choose the funeral black Derek had suggested. I chose a blood-red dress. Sharp, tailored, unapologetic. "Sleep well, Derek," I said to the empty room. "Dream about your horses. Dream about Europe. Because when you wake up, the nightmare begins." I pulled my Mercedes up to the wrought iron gates of my own estate at exactly noon. The sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows across the manicured lawns that I paid $4,000 a month to maintain. From the driveway, I could hear the hum of conversation and the soft, polite strains of a string quartet. Derek had gone all out. He had spared no expense, specifically my expense, to create the perfect illusion of a happy, wealthy family celebrating a milestone. The security guard at the gate was new, a private contractor likely hired by Nia to keep the riffraff out. He hesitated when he saw my car, his hand moving to his earpiece, but I simply held up the signed visitation agreement against the window. He frowned, checked his clipboard, and then reluctantly pressed the button. The gates swung open. It was the first victory of the day. I parked the car right next to Nia's leased Porsche. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I wasn't wearing the funeral black they had requested. I was wearing a blood-red Alexander McQueen dress that fit like a second skin. It was aggressive. It was bold. It was the color of war. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my stilettos, and walked toward the garden entrance. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. I felt like a gladiator stepping into the Colosseum, except in this arena I had rigged the lions. The garden was transformed. White silk tents were draped over the patio. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. But it was the guest list that made my blood run cold. Derek hadn't just invited Sophie's high school friends. He had invited his entire extended family, a collection of aunts and cousins who had always looked at me with thinly veiled envy. More alarmingly, I saw faces I recognized from the business world. There was the senior partner from Nia's law firm. There were 2 investors from a rival venture capital group. Nia had turned my daughter's 16th birthday into a networking event and a public execution of my reputation. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the elite of the city to see Claire, the unstable, abusive mother, being cast out of society. I had barely taken 3 steps onto the flagstone path when Beatrice intercepted me. She moved with surprising speed for a woman who claimed to have bad knees whenever I asked her to help with dishes. She was wearing a floral dress that I was fairly certain I had bought for her last Mother's Day, and around her neck hung a string of pearls that looked suspiciously like the ones missing from my jewelry box. "You still have the face to come here," Beatrice hissed, blocking my path with her body. Her eyes darted around, checking if anyone had seen me yet. "We thought you would have the decency to stay away after what you did to that poor girl." I looked down at her, my expression impassive behind my dark sunglasses. I didn't stop walking. I didn't engage. "Move, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. She stumbled back, slightly surprised by my tone. She had expected me to be weeping, to be begging for permission to enter. Instead, I walked past her like she was a piece of garden furniture. "You are ruining everything," she muttered to my back. "You are a stain on this family." I ignored her and scanned the crowd. And then I saw her. Sophie. She was sitting on a high-backed velvet chair in the center of the lawn like a doll on display. She was wearing a white dress that was too young for her, something a child of 10 would wear, chosen by Derek to emphasize her innocence and vulnerability. But it was her face that shattered my heart. She was pale, her skin translucent in the sunlight. Her eyes were glazed over, staring at a point in the middle distance. She held a glass of lemonade with both hands, her knuckles white. She looked sedated. She looked like a prisoner of war who had been forced to smile for a propaganda video. Every instinct in me wanted to run to her, to scoop her up and drive straight to the hospital. But I forced my feet to stay rooted. If I caused a scene now, I would lose. I had to wait for the trap to spring. A hush fell over the crowd as people began to notice me, the woman in the red dress walking through a sea of white linens. Whispers started to ripple through the guests. I saw Derek standing near the buffet. He froze mid-laugh, his eyes locking onto me. He looked terrified for a split second before he composed himself, putting on his mask of the long-suffering husband. He whispered something to Nia, who was standing next to him holding a glass of wine. Nia turned. Her eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected the red dress. She hadn't expected the confidence. But she recovered quickly. She signaled to the DJ to cut the music. The string quartet lowered their bows. The silence in the garden was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the clinking of ice in glasses. Nia walked to the small stage that had been set up for speeches. She tapped the microphone. Feedback whined through the speakers, making everyone wince. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nia said, her voice booming across the lawn. Her gaze was fixed directly on me. "Thank you all for coming today to celebrate our beloved Sophie." She paused for effect, letting the tension build. "We all know that this has been a difficult year for the family. We have faced challenges that no family should have to endure. Mental illness is a tragedy, and it destroys homes," the crowd murmured sympathetically. They all looked at me. I stood alone near the fountain, my chin held high, my hands relaxed at my sides. I let them stare. I let them judge. But today, Nia continued, her voice rising with theatrical passion. "Today is about healing. It is about safety. Today isn't just Sophie's 16th birthday. It is the day we officially welcome a new chapter. A chapter where Sophie is safe. A chapter where she is protected from toxicity and abuse." She gestured toward Derek, who walked over to stand beside her, looking humble and brave. "My brother Derek has fought tirelessly to save his daughter, and I am proud to announce that as of this morning, we are taking the final steps to liberate Sophie from the darkness that has clouded her life. We are here to support her freedom from a mother who—" Nia paused, acting as if she was too choked up to say the word. "From a mother who has lost her way. From a toxic influence that can no longer be allowed to damage this innocent child." Derek wiped a fake tear from his eye. The guests applauded politely, though many looked uncomfortable. They were witnessing a public shaming, and while they were morbidly fascinated, the cruelty of it was palpable. Nia smiled, basking in the attention. She thought she was the hero of the story. She thought she was delivering the eulogy for my motherhood. "So please," Nia concluded, "raise your glasses to Sophie and to Derek, the survivor and the savior." The crowd raised their glasses. To Sophie, they chorused. I didn't move. I didn't raise a glass. I stood there, a splash of crimson in a whitewashed lie, waiting for the applause to die down. Nia looked at me, her smile smug and victorious. She mouthed the words, "Go home." I took a slow breath. The air smelled of expensive perfume and rot. It was time. I reached into my clutch, not for a tissue, but for the remote control to the Bluetooth sound system that Marcus had hacked into 10 minutes ago. "You wanted a speech, Nia," I thought. "You wanted the truth to be heard." I stepped forward, my heels clicking loudly on the pavement. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing that the show wasn't over. I walked until I was 10 feet away from the stage. "I believe you forgot to mention one thing, Nia," I said, my voice calm but projecting clearly without a microphone. Nia laughed nervously into the mic. "Oh, look, she wants to make a scene. Someone call security. You forgot to mention the price tag," I said, staring straight at Derek. Derek took a step back. The color began to drain from his face. He knew that tone. It was the tone I used before I fired a CEO. I lifted the remote. "Happy birthday." "Sophie," I said, looking at my daughter. "Mom brought you a present." I pressed the button, and the garden went silent as the speakers crackled to life, not with music, but with the sound of a man's voice whispering in the dark. The silence in the garden was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a held breath. Every eye was fixed on me as I ascended the 3 wooden steps to the stage, the red fabric of my dress flowing like liquid courage around my legs. Derek, realizing that his narrative was about to be hijacked, abandoned his pose of the grieving father. He lunged toward me, his face twisted in a snarl of panic that the guests were too shocked to interpret. "Get her out of here!" Derek screamed, his voice cracking. "Someone grab her! She is trespassing!" He reached for my arm, his fingers clawing at the air, intent on dragging me down physically, since he couldn't drag me down legally. But he never made contact. 2 men in dark suits who had been blending into the perimeter near the catering tent stepped forward with the synchronized precision of military operatives. These weren't the rent-a-cops Nia had stationed at the gate. These were elite private security contractors I had hired 3 days ago. One of them, a man the size of a vending machine named Cole, stepped between me and my husband. He didn't push Derek. He simply occupied the space where Derek wanted to be, creating an immovable wall of muscle. Derek slammed into Cole's chest and bounced back, stumbling on the uneven stage. "Sir, take a step back," Cole said. His voice was low, devoid of aggression, but heavy with authority. Derek looked at the guard, then at me, his eyes bulging. "Who are these people? This is my property." "Actually," I said into the microphone, my voice amplified across the lawn, cutting through his hysteria. "It is my property, and these gentlemen are here to ensure that the owner of this estate is allowed to speak." I turned my back on Derek, dismissing him as a threat. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw confusion. I saw curiosity. I saw the senior partners of Nia's law firm exchanging worried glances. They were beginning to realize that the script had changed. I locked eyes with Nia. She was still standing near the podium, her hand gripping her wine glass so hard her knuckles were white. She looked like a deer in headlights, sensing the impact before seeing the car. "Nia," I said, my voice smooth and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "You made a very compelling speech just now. You spoke about the law. You spoke about protection. You said that the American legal system is designed to shield the innocent." I took a step closer to her. The feedback from the speakers whined slightly, adding an eerie dissonance to the moment. "You are absolutely right, Nia. The law is very strict, especially when it comes to specific statutes. Statutes like federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and most heinous of all, child endangerment and psychological abuse." Nia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She tried to laugh, but it sounded like a cough. I turned to the crowd, my gaze sweeping over Sophie's friends, over the neighbors who had whispered about me, over the business rivals who had come to gloat. "I have video footage from inside this house," I announced. The crowd gasped. A ripple of murmurs broke out. I saw Sophie look up, her eyes wide with fear. She thought I was going to show a video of her crying, of her humiliated. I looked at my daughter. "Sophie, I promised I would protect you. And I will. I will not show your face on this screen. Your privacy matters more to me than my vindication. I will not let these people see you in your most vulnerable moments." I paused, letting the relief wash over Sophie's face. Then I hardened my gaze, turning it back to Derek. "But they need to hear the truth. They need to hear the voice of the man who claims to be your savior." I lifted the remote. Derek lunged again, screaming, "Don't you dare! Turn it off! Cut the power!" Cole simply extended an arm, holding Derek back as if he were a petulant child. I pressed the play button. The sound that erupted from the high-quality speakers wasn't music. It was the sound of a room tone, the distinct, intimate silence of a bedroom at night. And then, a whisper filled the garden. It was amplified, distorted slightly by the volume, but the timbre was unmistakable. It was Derek. "Mom hates you, Sophie. Mom wishes you were never born." The glass in Nia's hand slipped. It hit the flagstone patio with a sharp, explosive crash that echoed the shockwave hitting the audience. Red wine splattered across her white shoes like blood, but she didn't move. She stared at the speaker, her face draining of color, until she looked like a wax figure. I didn't stop the recording. I let it play. I let the poison seep into every corner of the garden. "She told me she wants to send you away. She wants to lock you in a hospital. Only Daddy loves you. Only Auntie Nia can protect you." The guests were frozen. The waiters stopped serving. The wind seemed to die down. The only sound in the world was Derek's voice dismantling his own daughter's psyche. "You have to help us get rid of her. You have to sign the papers Nia gives you. If you don't, Mom will hurt you again." I watched the faces in the crowd change. The judgment that had been directed at me moments ago evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrifying realization. They weren't at a birthday party. They were at the scene of a crime. I saw a mother in the front row cover her mouth with her hand. I saw one of Sophie's friends look at Derek with pure disgust. But I wasn't done. I needed the motive. I needed the kill shot. I skipped the track forward to the recording from last night. The midnight confession. Mouths to feed Sophie. "We need the money." Derek's voice boomed again, this time sounding impatient, cruel. "She looks at you and she sees a mistake. She sees a burden. She only loves her money. And she hates that you are the one standing between her and that trust fund." The gasps from the crowd were audible now. The words trust fund hung in the air, stripping away the noble facade Derek had built. If I wasn't here to protect you, she would have discarded you years ago. "Never forget that. She is the monster. I am the only one who cares. Now sign the paper so we can go to Europe." "You stupid woman." Nia's voice cut in from a different clip I had spliced in the recording from the restaurant. "You are just a checkbook. Derek is the real parent. We are just doing what is necessary to secure the assets." I hit the stop button. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and suffocating. It was the silence of a truth so ugly it sucked the oxygen out of the air. I lowered the remote. I looked at Derek. He wasn't fighting the guards anymore. He was standing perfectly still, his hands hanging limp at his sides. His face had gone from flushed red to a sickly paste like white. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. He looked at the guests, pleading silently with his eyes, but no one looked back. They looked at the ground. They looked at me. I looked at Nia. She was trembling. Not a subtle tremor, but a full body shake. She looked at the senior partner of her firm. He was staring at her with a look of cold professional detachment, the look of a man calculating liability and preparing to cut ties. She knew in that moment that her career was over. The wine stain on her shoe was the least of her problems. I stepped down from the stage. I walked through the frozen crowd toward the table where Sophie sat. The path cleared for me instantly. People shrank back as if my red dress was made of fire. I stopped in front of my daughter. She was looking at me, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't the tears of a terrified child anymore. They were the tears of someone waking up from a long, dark nightmare. She looked at Derek, then back at me. The fog of the drugs seemed to lift for a second, pierced by the sharp clarity of her father's recorded betrayal. "He said you hated me," Sophie whispered. I knelt down, ignoring the grass staining my dress. I took her hands. They were cold. "I loved you enough to walk into the fire for you, Sophie. I said loud enough for only her to hear, and I loved you enough to burn it all down to get you back." I stood up and turned to the back of the garden. "Officers," I called out. "You have heard the confession. I believe you have enough for probable cause." From behind the high hedges, 4 uniformed police officers emerged. They had been there the whole time, briefed by Marcus, waiting for the signal. The sound of their boots on the stone path was the final punctuation mark to Derek's sentence. Derek looked at the police, then at the back gate. He took a step, thinking about running. "Don't even think about it," Sir Cole said, placing a heavy hand on Derek's shoulder. Derek slumped. The air of arrogance of moral superiority vanished, leaving behind only a small, greedy man who had gambled and lost. I looked at Nia. She was trying to wipe the wine off her shoe with a cocktail napkin, a pathetic, futile gesture. "Nia," I said, "I wouldn't worry about the shoe. Where you are going, you will be wearing orange." The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut on Derek's wrists clicked through the garden. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard, but the symphony wasn't finished yet. There was still the matter of the bill to be paid. I walked over to the buffet table, cleared a space among the untouched silver platters of hors d'oeuvres, and dropped the thick leather portfolio I had been carrying all afternoon. It hit the wood with a heavy, authoritative thud that made the guests jump. The noise cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a gavel striking a judge's bench. I opened the portfolio. "Officer," I said, addressing the policeman who was currently reading Derek his rights. "In this folder, you will find the toxicology report from a hair follicle test conducted on my daughter 3 days ago. It shows chronic exposure to high-grade benzodiazepines, the same drugs found in the prescription bottles in my husband's bedside drawer. He didn't just manipulate her mind to turn her against me. He chemically altered it to make her compliant. That is assault with a deadly weapon on a minor." The officer nodded, taking the file. He looked at Derek with pure disgust. Derek tried to stammer a defense, claiming it was for her anxiety, but the evidence was irrefutable. The crowd gasped again. The friends who had eaten his barbecue, the family members who had praised his parenting, they all looked at him now as if he were a monster. I wasn't done. I turned my attention to Nia. She was staring at the ground, trying to make herself invisible, her expensive shoes still stained with wine. "Nia, I didn't forget about you." I pulled out a second document from the portfolio. This is a copy of the formal complaint I filed with the State Bar Association exactly 60 minutes ago. It contains proof of your forgery of court documents, your conspiracy to defraud a minor, and your attempts to extort me. You might want to call your firm. Although judging by the way your senior partner just walked out of the garden without looking at you, I think they already know. The second police officer stepped toward Nia. "Miss Nia, we have a separate warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud and identity theft. Please place your hands behind your back." Nia let out a high-pitched wail as the officer grabbed her wrists. "You can't do this. I am an attorney. I know my rights. You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, tightening the cuffs. "I suggest you use it." Derek was struggling against the officer holding him, his face a mask of pure desperation. "But the money," he shouted, his eyes wild. "You can't take the trust. It belongs to Sophie. I am still her father." Even in shackles, facing 20 years in prison, he was thinking about the cash. It was pathological. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that echoed off the stone walls of the garden. "Actually, Derek, that brings me to the final document." I held up a bank confirmation letter, the paper crisp and white in the sunlight. "You see, my father was a very paranoid man. When he set up Sophie's trust, he wrote a specific clause into the agreement called the Emergency Protection Protocol. It states that if any attempt is made to coerce the beneficiary or remove the primary trustee through fraudulent means, the entire fund is automatically liquidated." Derek stopped struggling. He stared at the paper in my hand. "Liquidated," he whispered. Transferred, I corrected him. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the $50 million you have been salivating over has been moved to an offshore holding account in Switzerland. It is under my name, and it is locked in an irrevocable trust until Sophie turns 25. You can't touch it. Nia can't touch it. Even the U.S. courts can't touch it. It is gone, Derek. You didn't just lose your family today. You lost the fortune you sold your soul to get. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and the officer had to hold him up. The color drained from his face completely, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked at the mansion, the cars, the lifestyle he had felt entitled to, and he realized it was all dissolving into smoke. I walked up to him until I was inches from his face. I could smell the sweat and the fear radiating off him. He looked at me with hate, spitting the words out through gritted teeth. You are a monster, Claire. You are cold. You only love money. That is all you ever cared about. You never loved us. I smiled. I leaned in close so he could see the life in my eyes, the fire that he had mistaken for ice. You are wrong about a lot of things, Derek, but you are right about one thing. I do love money. I let the silence hang for a second, letting the tension peak. I love money enough to use it to send you to prison. I nodded to the officers. Get them out of my garden. As they dragged Derek and Nia away, kicking and screaming past the stunned guests, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. I didn't watch them go. I didn't care about their pleas or their threats. They were already part of my past. I turned back to my daughter, who was watching me with awe. The nightmare was over. The check had cleared, and the balance was finally restored. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when you have the best legal team that money can buy, they tend to pick up speed. The trial of Derek and Nia was not the media circus they had hoped for. It was a surgical dismantling of two narcissists who thought they were smarter than the system. I sat in the front row every single day. I wore a different tailored suit for each session, a visual reminder that while their lives were falling apart, mine was perfectly put together. Derek tried to play the victim one last time. His defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer because he could no longer afford private counsel, tried to argue that Derek was a desperate father acting out of love. But the jury didn't buy it. Not after they heard the recordings. Not after they saw the toxicology reports. When the verdict was read, Derek didn't cry. He just stared at the wall, his face devoid of the arrogant charm that had fooled me for 15 years. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, extortion, child endangerment. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly seen enough men like Derek to last a lifetime, didn't hold back during sentencing. She gave him 10 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole for the first 8. I watched as the bailiff clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes pleading for a miracle, for a check for a bailout. I simply checked my watch. His time was up. Nia's downfall was perhaps even more satisfying because it was so absolute. The State Bar Association didn't just disbar her. They made an example of her. She was stripped of her license to practice law permanently. Her firm dissolved within a week, buried under the weight of the scandal and the lawsuits from former clients who realized they had been duped. But the real blow came from the bank. The foreclosure on her condo went through immediately. She lost the Mercedes. She lost the designer wardrobe. She lost the illusion of status she had clung to so desperately. Last week I had to stop at a discount grocery store to pick up some supplies for a charity drive. I was standing in the checkout line when I saw her. Nia, the woman who had sipped Dom Perignon and told me I was culturally bankrupt. She was wearing a faded smock, scanning cans of beans and bags of rice. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, the roots showing inches of gray. She looked 20 years older. She didn't see me at first. I watched her argue with a customer over a 50-cent coupon. When she finally looked up and locked eyes with me, she froze. I didn't say anything. I didn't smirk. I just placed my items on the belt, paid with my black card, and walked out. The shame in her eyes was a punishment far worse than any prison sentence. She was trapped in the mundane, poverty-stricken life she had always looked down upon. As for Beatrice, the Queen Mother, who had enabled this entire dysfunction, her fate was sealed the moment Derek went to prison. With no son to manipulate and no daughter-in-law to leech off of, she was left with nothing. The bank seized Derek's assets to pay off his gambling debts, leaving Beatrice homeless. I didn't intervene. I didn't offer her a guest room. Instead, she was placed in a state-funded nursing facility on the outskirts of the city. It is a gray, cheerless place that smells of boiled cabbage and antiseptic. I hear she spends her days telling anyone who will listen that she used to live in a mansion and that her daughter-in-law is a devil. The nurses just nod and turn up the volume on the television. She is finally receiving exactly the amount of attention she deserves. None. But while watching my enemies crumble was satisfying, it was nothing compared to the battle I had to fight at home. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the quiet, painful hours of the night with my daughter. Sophie didn't bounce back immediately. You don't just wake up from 6 months of chemical sedation and psychological gaslighting and go back to normal. We spent the first few weeks just detoxing her system. She had night terrors. She would wake up screaming, convinced that I was coming to hurt her. It broke my heart 1,000 times over, but I never left her side. I moved a bed into her room. I held her hand while she shook. I hired the best trauma therapists in the country, specialists who understood cult deprogramming, because that is essentially what Derek had done to her. We had to rebuild our relationship from the ground up. I had to learn to be softer, to put away the CEO persona, and just be a mom. And Sophie had to learn to trust her own memories again. There were days when she would look at me with suspicion, echoes of Derek's lies still whispering in her mind. But I was patient. I showed her the truth, not with arguments, but with consistency. I was there for breakfast. I was there for dinner. I listened to her anger, her confusion, her grief for the father she thought she had. The breakthrough happened on a rainy Tuesday 6 months after the party. I was in the kitchen making tea. Sophie walked in. She looked different. The gray cast to her skin was gone, replaced by a healthy flush. Her eyes were clear. She stood by the counter watching me. "Mom," she said softly. I turned around. "Yes, honey. I remember," she said. "I remember the night he came in. I remember what he said about the money." She started to cry, but this time she didn't pull away. She walked toward me. "I am so sorry," she sobbed, collapsing into my arms. "I am so sorry I believed him. I am so sorry I hurt you." I held her tighter than I had ever held anything in my life. I buried my face in her hair. "You have nothing to apologize for, Sophie," I whispered. "You were a child. You survived. We survived." That was the moment the war truly ended. Not when the gavel fell, but when my daughter came back to me. We couldn't stay in that house. It was too big, too full of ghosts and bad memories. Every corner reminded us of the betrayal. So I sold it. I sold the furniture. I sold the expensive rugs Beatrice loved. I sold the pool where Nia had judged me. We packed only what mattered, our clothes, our books, and the few photos that were genuine, and we left. We moved to Manhattan. I bought a penthouse overlooking Central Park. It is a space of light and glass high above the noise, far away from the suburbs and the toxicity. Sophie is attending a private school for the arts now. She is painting again. She laughs again. She has friends who know her for who she is not, for her trust fund. We have a doorman, strict security, and a rule that no one enters our lives unless they bring peace. Tonight, the city lights are glittering below me like a carpet of diamonds. I am sitting on the terrace, a glass of vintage Cabernet in my hand. The night air is crisp, carrying the energy of a city that never sleeps. My phone buzzes on the glass table. I glance at it. It is a notification from my investment portfolio. The quarterly returns are in. The market is up, and my net worth just increased by another significant margin. The money Derek tried to steal, the money Nia tried to extort, is still here. It is growing. It is safe. And more importantly, it is firmly under my control. I take a sip of wine, savoring the complex notes of oak and berry. I think about Derek in his cell sleeping on a thin mattress. I think about Nia scanning items at the register, her feet aching in cheap shoes. And I feel a profound sense of peace. They mistook my kindness for weakness. They mistook my silence for submission. They forgot the most important rule of nature. The female wolf is not dangerous because she is loud. She is dangerous because she protects the pack at all costs. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the stranger in the alley. It is the person sleeping on the pillow next to you, the person who knows your passwords, your fears, and your vulnerabilities. If there is one thing I learned from this war, it is this. Trust is beautiful, but control is essential. Check the cameras, read the fine print, and never ever let anyone else hold the keys to your kingdom. I look at the skyline feeling the power of my own freedom. So tell me, what was the moment that made you cheer the loudest? Was it seeing Nia in handcuffs realizing her career was ashes? Or was it the look on Derek's face when he realized the millions he stole had vanished into thin air? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, the best revenge isn't just surviving, it is thriving while they rot. Stay sharp, stay safe, and I will see you in the next story.